Welcome to the 4050 Live. Thank you so much for journeying with us over these 40 days across 50 states. This is a movement of prayer and fasting and action to heal our nation's racial divide. And so we're so very grateful that you join us on your lunch. And it might be a late lunch today because you're still with us. So thank you for that. We have some incredible guests today. We will be discussing the film, The 24th. And that film, many of you have seen it. And if you have not seen it, please look it up and see it. It's available on all digital platforms and also on your cable providers. And the 24th, it stars Trai Byers. He also is co-writer on that film, and it's directed by Kevin Wilmot. And Kevin won the Academy for screenwriting for Black Klansman with Spike Lee. Okay, so we've seen the film, and today's discussion is all about how it is that films like this, and especially also including the historical record, why are these films so important in healing our racial divide, right? So just off the top, I have to tell you, this is a panel discussion, right? Or I would like to say a discussion amongst friends and family. And this is not like American Idol. We're not going to hold up numbers. Dr. Timothy is not Simon Cowell. Sister Nancy is not Paula Abdul, and Byron Gautier is not Randy Jackson. Okay, so we're not going to hold up any signs, and our purpose here is not to come for the film, right? Our purpose here is to have a robust dialogue around the theology and the artistry and then the history, so that we can begin to, as a faith family, really wrestle with the issues and come out on the other side with, what do we do from here? Right? What do we do from here? So I just need to tell you that up front, because that helps to shape and to guide how we move forward, right? All right. So let me introduce our wonderful guests, and then we've got some really good questions that I want them to get to. So first and foremost, Dr. Timothy Basselin, and he is I've been saying you're a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary. So, I mean, I looked up the official record and it says assistant professor, but you know what, Dr. Timothy, you're a professor to me. He's professor of media arts and worship at Dallas Theological Seminary. That is my alma mater, as you guys know. And he comes by way of Fuller Theological Seminary, where he got his master's and PhD. Now, I met Dr. Timothy when I went up to Moody and did some work there. And so it says here that he has taught at multiple colleges throughout Chicago before going to DTS, with research interests in theology and disability and weakness, as well as the intersection or the interaction between theology, culture, and literature. He was well suited for his role in the Department of Media Arts and Worship. And I'm very grateful, still very grateful, to have been one of the first alum in that media arts and worship with that degree. So we have a connection there, and we love our Dallas Seminary family. He's on the editorial board of Christian Scholars Review, and he also serves as the director of the Media Arts Apprenticeship Program at DTS, and enjoys collaborating with his students. He and his wife Robin have 4 children and enjoy road trips and camping. And you know what? Dr. Tim has taken students to Sundance and participated in Win Writer every year for the last 7 years. So he knows about film, he knows about media. And would you like to greet the people, Dr. Timothy, and then we'll introduce Sister Nancy.
Hello, people. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Naima.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Now, Sister Nancy, and I just met Sister Nancy. Did you guys know that there are film critics who are nuns? Come on, people. If you go to that hashtag media nuns, it's not just Sister Nancy, there's a whole slew of them, right? And they've been doing this work for years, people. But I'm so very glad to have met her through our wonderful friend, Karen Cavell of the Hollywood Prayer Network, as well as Caleb with Reality here in LA. And she is, it says she's the daughter of St. Paul and the director of the Pauline Center for Media Studies here in Los Angeles. She's a media literacy education specialist, an international speaker, theologian, writer, and film reviewer, and pop culture blogger for BeMediaMindful.org. BeMediaMindful.org. and also CatholicMom.com. She has a degree in communications arts and a master's in theology and the arts from Fuller Theological Seminary. So we have that connection there between her and also Dr. Timothy. Her award-winning book entitled A Sacred Look, Becoming Cultural Mystics is a theology of popular culture. She's an avid social media enthusiast, and she'll be able to give you her handle at the end. But we want to say welcome so much. Thank you for joining us, Sister Nancy. Thank you for being on board.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's so great to be with you. And anytime we talk about film, this is just a great moment. And it affects so much about culture and life. And so this is a great opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Byron Gautier. And you know what? I say it like that because I can, right? I just have to disclose that Byron is family. This project has allowed me to bring you just the real gems and the outstanding scholars that we have in our family. And I'm so proud of this. So Byron married my husband's sister, Yolanda. Okay. And so if you're following that, Kevin, of course, is the hubby. Yolanda is the sister. And Byron and Yolanda have been married for, help me out, Byron.
22 years.
13 years.
22.
I started
22.
to say 15. 22. I was about to say 15. I'm way off.
And so am I, because I haven't done the math. So I may get shot later, but nah, it's 22 years.
Come on now, come on. Now, Byron is on because Byron has done the historical work, like he's done the research in Houston around this film, because the organization that he is the immediate past president of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated in Houston, his fraternity has been walking alongside the families, right? And so we have him specifically because he has researched this. It's been a task to actually do the research, right? And a lot of it has been buried and hidden, but he's done the research, and then he also was able to get the national organization involved in walking with this. So he has a lot of understanding and will be able to share in regards to this particular movie, but from the historical record. So he's the immediate past president of the Alpha Eta Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, which is seated there in Houston, Texas. He's the proud graduate of Florida A&M, say that fast 5 times, University.
I think that's a Howard in you.
Huh?
I think that's the Howard University part of you that said that wrong, but I'll let that go.
HU, all my Howard graduates just had a moment, but that was Byron giving us props, people. He was giving us props as the Mecca, as a fellow HBCU. He was just saying how wonderful Howard is. That's what it sounded like to me. That's how it sounded on this side, like he was giving wonderful props. I love you, man. He's the AV minister leader at the Fort Bend Church under the leadership of Pastor Brian Stevenson. Hello, Pastor Stevenson. And Byron and his wife, Yolanda, have 2 children, Brianna and Evan, who are a wonderful niece and nephew. Okay, let's jump in, people. First of all, can you tell the family how you're doing, right? We're all going through this pandemic. We're all kind of we're all in this together. So just very briefly and quickly, I didn't give you a chance to greet the people. Byron, greet the people.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much, fam, for having me on. And I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to sharing with this panel. And I'll go ahead and just start, just to kind of let you know, this is a new normal for us. This is a lot different. A lot of things have changed, but we are adapting. And that's the great thing about it. You have to have a positive mindset and adapt. And so while it is still a very important issue for us to be safe and to be secure and to be mindful of your surroundings and all the things that's going on. But we're thankful that we're still here, we're surviving, and then we're hopeful for the future. I think that's the best kind of mindset to have. So,
thank you, Byron. Thank you.
I totally agree with that. It is all about having hope and helping other people have hope. I just found this whole time to be one of continual learning And, you know, that's part of life. We have to continually to keep learning and to keep understanding, keep reading. I mean, that's just keeping our minds active. And that's a really important part during this time. And it's just kind of allowed me to be creative and find new ways and find new outlets. And in one sense, it's been very exciting. For me, but also to share a lot of that, share a sense of hope and of faith and with all the people that we encounter, especially now through Zoom and all these other live streaming platforms. So that's what we hope to do and I hope to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
One thing I came to learn this summer was that it's difficult to celebrate during a pandemic. We have 4 kids, and all 4 of them had birthdays this summer.
Oh.
My oldest turned 18, so it was a big birthday, and the second one turned 16.
Okay.
And the oldest one's going off to college, and then we had my parents' 50th anniversary.
Oh, wow.
My wife and I's anniversary,
wow.
her parents' anniversary. So usually you throw a party, and people come, and it's a big celebration. But this summer, it's been, you have to be real creative in how to celebrate that person.
Did you guys do any of the drive-by stuff?
We did, yeah. We got the kids out to the park, and then had, texted all their friends and stuff to come and just drive by, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're creative people. Okay. So yeah. So our God kids, their parents did that, the drive-by, and the kids loved it. It was like they had their own personal parade. They were so happy. I was like, oh, the joy, right? Yeah. So we have some definitely new normals, but you're right. It's hard to celebrate. Hard to celebrate in a pandemic. That will preach, Dr. Timothy. Hard to celebrate in a pandemic. Can you, and we'll just go in the reverse order. Dr. Timothy, can you share why it is that you got involved in media and film in the first place? And we'll ask that of each of you. Like, what's the background here? And I ask this because I want the family to understand, like, how you came to the table. The more that we understand one another, the more that we understand just what film and what media actually do for our nation and for our world. So how did you come to this?
Well, I grew up in a Pentecostal setting with a holiness background, where holiness meant separation away from culture. And so I actually grew up without a TV. We did not go to the movies. I knew nothing about media.
Wow.
And so as I went into college, and then I went into my master's and eventually my PhD, that was really a space for me to heal that divide that was inside of me, to the point where I did a PhD in theology and culture and focused on literature. And so my mentor, Rob Johnston, is pretty well known in the theology and film realm. And so then after I started working at DTS, I had the opportunity to begin taking students to Sundance every year and to participate in the Windwriter Forum, which has just been incredible. It's been really great. And just to be especially with independent films, to be on the front edge of what culture is doing and talking about and feeling, to have those things coming out and to be able to engage with it and most importantly, to listen well. That's the thing I try to concentrate on with my students, is learning to listen well.
Yes. That's so true and so good. Like we all need to do that, don't we? We all need to listen well. How
Especially
about you,
this year?
Sister Nancy?
Well, actually, I've always been a lover of movies, music, and books. So to me, media has just been an essential part of my life. And then I eventually entered the community that I belong to, the Daughters of St. Paul. Our whole mission is to work in evangelization through and in the media culture. So that's what we are. We're publishers. We're teachers of media. And that's what I specifically do now, is I teach a lot on media literacy education from a faith formation perspective. So how do we marry that? How do we integrate our faith life with our media experience? And that's kind of where we're going at it. And that's why I wrote that book on a theology of pop culture, was to give that foundation. And then when I became the director of the Media Study Center, it actually became natural that I also was a film reviewer, because I've been writing a lot about theology and pop culture, but then being here near Hollywood, we get a lot of invitations for, film events. And so started writing a lot more on film reviews. And I've also been very much part of Win Writer for many years, also at Sundance, long time ago, maybe perhaps you, before Dr. Timothy was there. I haven't had a chance to go back, but I'm waiting for that day. I've also been teaching, I've also taught college students on theology and film
Yes.
as an adjunct professor in a few places. So that's always kind of been my passion. And I love independent films and foreign films. And so that's kind of like my area where I love to delve in more. Short films as well, things that people don't see in the big blockbusters, I like to kind of delve because the storytelling is so rich and profound. So
wonderful. Thank you. Byron?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to growing up. Both my parents were history teachers, or at least had a foundation in teaching history and social studies. And I kind of enjoyed the fact that storytelling was a good mechanism to teach people history. And so I remember watching To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and how that had such an impact, the book and both the film adaptation, to really teach people and to draw things in. And so fast forward, as I was entering high school, I fashioned myself being a radio TV journalist. I took that in high school, and when I was in college, I actually produced a television show, working at all different angles while being a business administration major. And when I got in the world, I decided, maybe journalism wasn't my forte, but really so much more on the business side. And then I found myself at my church, working in our media ministry. And so I get a chance every Sunday as a director to craft and tell a story to the audience on the other side of the screen, a good representation of what's going on and how things are happening live inside of the church. And so that, coupled with the fact that in my current profession, I'm a learning and development professional. And so we use storytelling a lot in terms of being able to get our messages across from a teaching perspective, also working with our clients and our customers. How do we arc and tell the story to have the most impact to relay messaging? So I think for me, the whole media aspect really surrounds storytelling and how to be able to craft a message to be able to address the audience that you're trying to reach.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, let's talk the 24th. Can we talk, people? Let's talk about this. Come on. All right, so this film, why is this film in particular so important to the dialogue for racial healing? Why is this film, The 24, so important to our dialogue around racial healing? And anybody can jump in, and not everybody has to answer every question, right? But just jump in, get in where you fit in. Who wants to jump
let me
forward?
start, because I just talked about history and I talked about learning. And I think when you start to try to understand and what's going on in our country and the divisions that are perceived and some are real that are taking place, you have to kind of understand the other person. You have to understand where they're coming from. You have to understand all of American history. And so it's important for us to document these, not just through historical references, through websites and through teaching methods, but also through film and also through other expressions like books, et cetera, and TV. And this film really is important because it gives us a look at the post-slavery Jim Crow era of how things were positioned and living in the South, but also a very interesting dynamic because you were dealing with African Americans at that time who were free, who were working and were really considered to be treasured parts of the United States, military men who had served their country. And how does that person who has been enriched and has fought for and has been recognized within their country, they now have to be subject to the Jim Crow laws, and how does that mix turn out? So it really does paint a picture of where we are historically through the Jim Crow era, but also through how people were dealing with and living and showcasing what that actually looked like during that time period.
Yeah, thank you. That's so good. And then what Byron is saying too around us having to understand one another, right? So if in fact we're going to get to this place of healing the racial divide, it must be rooted and grounded in a place of understanding. And how can we understand one another if we don't know the truth, right? If part of the truth is buried and nobody wants to talk about it, and then we all get upset when anybody wants to talk about it, like that's not an environment by which we can actually thrive, or that racial healing can actually take place. So, so what he's saying is very important in the sense that these things have to come forward in order for us to be able to walk in truth, and then for us to understand each other, right? I mean, I think that's what
Absolutely.
you're saying, right? Okay, anybody else before we jump to the next one?
Well, actually, I've been thinking that too. It's important really to understand the history. That's crucial. I mean, for us to be able to look and understand where we're coming from, where things are, why they are now as they are, we have to go back and look and examine. And yes, we can't change history. We can't change what happened. However, we can change ourselves, and we can change our own perspective on how we're seeing things now, and examine our own hearts, examine everything that's going on within us and within our country and within our world. I think what an important part of this film, that it kind of got, in some ways can get glossed over, but when William Boston says that he was going to stay there, and he stays there with his troops, with the other men, and which he kept saying, we are soldiers and we are men. And that's really important to emphasize, that theologically, the human dignity of every human being. There's a dignity to every human being that cannot be lost, cannot be taken away. And this is an important thing to retrieve from this history. But when he gives the example of sacrifice over ambition, and that was really a powerful moment for me in the film, when he chose to stay, even though he was not one who fired any shots, but he stayed with them. And I think that there's this understanding of sacrifice and being with one another through these challenging times, to sacrifice this struggle. It's a sacrifice to work it through, to dialogue, to talk. And, so often we think that dialogue is argument. It's arguments in sense of pushing our own ideas. Well, and maybe we've lost that art of argumenting, of arguing with each other, that art of dialogue, where we may have different perspectives, but we gotta talk. We can talk civilly.
That's right.
And this is really important for us to bring back into our culture. And I think this film gets us to do that.
So good.
This film just came out in the last week, correct? I just watched it and what timing for it. Right. My goodness. My Facebook feed has been full this last week of a lot of people, blaming looters and upset about riots and that sort of thing. And this film, it really highlights and makes you walk in the feeling and the experience of what happens when we have a social contract. And one side has said, you need to hold up this social contract. And the other side keeps breaking the social contract over and over and over and over again. At what point does the social contract not hold weight anymore? At what point does the other side say, if you're not going to hold the social contract, why do we need to continue to do it? And you can't go through this film without deeply wrestling with that question. And it doesn't give you an answer and say this is the correct or this is right, but it pulls you in deeply into that question.
Yeah. So you guys have already gone on to the next question, which is, and so let's just keep talking. What does this film actually mean? Like, what does it mean? What does it mean socially? What does it mean theologically? What does it mean artistically? Like, what does it mean? And, just to kind of catch some people up, if you haven't seen it already, this is not a spoiler alert. This is what actually happened in Houston, Texas, 1917, what's referred to commonly as the Houston Race Riot of 1917. And it came off of the backs of the riot that happened in East St. Louis. And there were several lynchings that were happening throughout the South. It was a bloody, bloody year and a bloody summer coming into 1917. And so this film revolves around an event that happened August 23rd, 1917, and that's when the 24th Regiment of the United States Army, at that time they were called the Colored Soldiers, right, or the Colored Regiment, right? They were sent to Houston to build this Camp Logan for the other soldiers. But in that sending them there, they ran into all kinds of issues with the Jim Crow laws of Houston, and there was a lot of abuse, a lot of things that went down, and finally, throughout, and I mean, maybe you can share a little bit too, Byron, because the families still don't agree on what actually happened. And then the film allowed you to see that, you know, like some people said one thing happened, some people said another thing happened, right? But for the most part, because there was such confusion, right, even now, the families are still trying to get some resolution around it, because what was actually put in the written record, it doesn't match up, right? And so many times, and this is what we're seeing even today, I'm so glad you brought this up, Dr. Timothy, even today, when we see some things going down and immediately somebody else comes along and says the complete opposite of what we just saw, when the reporting of the event goes down, and you're like, wait, now I know what I saw, right? And I find myself saying this more and more these days. I know what I saw, right? Like I know what I know, and I know what the truth is. It's almost like I have to say out loud, that is not true, or that is true, and or, you know, and so it would be as if 100 years from now, people are looking back at how we're writing about what's happening now, and they're two completely different sides of the story, right? And people are wondering, what part of this, like, how do we make a film about this when you know what's going on? So maybe jump in a little bit, Byron, and catch us up on what you learned, because you learned
to kind of set the scene even
research.
further. You have to understand that 1917, we're also coming off the backs of the convict leasing programs, where that kind of replaced slavery, where we passed laws that allow you to legally discriminate against someone. So you didn't have to hire someone, but then they passed laws that said if you didn't have a job, then you were considered a vagrant, and they would arrest you. And the convict leasing program would then say, you go work in this place for pennies on the dollar. And so it was really a churn that replaced slavery. So you're looking at getting out of the convict leasing program, moving into the early parts of the before World War I, but there were a lot of conflicts that were going on. And so African-American soldiers had fought in the Civil War. We all know the story of Glory with Denzel Washington and Matthew Broderick and all those that brought that wonderful story about the 54th. But beyond that, the 24th Regiment, Buffalo soldiers that patrolled the Western frontier, also were very historic. They fought alongside of President, at that time, Teddy Roosevelt, and there's references to these were professional soldiers. Two of the men in the 24th were actually decorated with the Congressional Medal of Honor. So now you have these soldiers that are valuable, and they are entering to a situation where now what do we do with them? And the South did not want the soldiers there. Anytime that they were looking at camps or bases, they did not want the Negro soldier, as they called it, to participate. And so conversely, now you look at states' rights and Jim Crow laws, but you also have to understand that the federal government had money to spend on its defense. And so Houston actually signed and awarded a $2 million contract. But
that's $2 million in 1917.
In 1917, right? $2 million contract to build Camp Logan, which is the area where the soldiers were hired to supervise the construction of that National Guard unit. And so it meant a lot to the economy of Houston to bring those federal dollars in and those jobs. But so many other southern cities did not want the Black soldiers to come with the federal money. And so even though Houston allowed accepted the money, they still pushed back. And so it sets up an environment where we don't want the Black soldiers coming in into town and causing trouble or whatever the case may be. against a situation of still trying to hold on to the Jim Crow laws in that situation. So the film really puts us into a situation where it had all the elements of drama and mystery. And I think the film does a really good job of, once you understand that backdrop, of taking us through that story of how we got to where we were.
Yeah, most definitely. So what does it mean? What does this mean? What does this mean theologically? If you know, any of the theologians want to jump in, what does this mean theologically? What does this mean artistically? What is the meaning of this? Like when you, once you finished it and you had a moment, because once you finish it, you have to take a moment. Like this is not one of those films where you finish it and you're like, right? Like you finish it and you go, okay, we gonna have to ponder some things. We're gonna have to we're gonna have to think through some things, right? And that's an attribute to good writing, right? So we gotta ponder some things about life. Like, what are we doing? What's going on? So what did you come up with when you pondered? What's the meaning? What's the meaning of this?
Go ahead, Sister Nancy.
Oh, well, I was gonna, well, it was very disturbing, first of all, just to watch this film. And I watch a lot of films, but it's disturbing on many fronts. And I think...
I had to take multiple breaks.
Yeah, and I think, first of all, it's just why...
Did either one of you know about what happened before?
No. That's the thing. I was like, why don't we know these things? Why is this not even in our consciousness and awareness of it as a country? So first of all, that's kind of disturbing that we don't know all these details. We don't know a lot of the history.
Why do you think it was buried? Because this is purposely buried, right?
Right. It's purposely buried. They don't want it to be known. You know, whoever was of the cultural, you know, politics or whatever of the time. And this is just so beyond me, I guess. But I guess I was looking at it from also a theological perspective. Yes. And that whole situation of righteous anger, you know, when there is the suppression or oppression of any human being, to be who they are called to be, you know, a human being made in God's image, right? There is going to be this like explosion of righteous anger in response.
Yes. Now,
of course, it's what we do with it. You know, even theologically, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that righteous anger? You know, is it in this perpetrating the same violence on others that violence has come to us? Now, this is the dilemma of the film. You know, where does the cycle of violence end, and how does it end when it doesn't seem to be any moment of actual reconciliation? There isn't a recognition of the need for reconciliation, the need for understanding, the need for dialogue, the need for, because they're still lacking that respect of human dignity. And that's what's disturbing in the film. And it leaves you feeling that disturbance.
because the truth of the matter is we're still there, right?
Exactly.
Right. So if something had changed between 1917 and now, like, you know, you know how it's done at the end of the film where it cuts to and you see the wonderful, you know, the resolution, and in, you know, and in 2020 the such and such and such was passed and the such and such had happened, and it's like, oh great, wonderful, there's some resolve. But it just kind of leaves us, well, one, there's the hope, right? Because you see that the love, at least the love, you know, the love interest, you know, was able to be able to leave and to do something else, right? But the other part of it is it just kind of leaves us because the truth, even as Byron testified, like this is still unresolved, right?
It becomes systemic because it's forcing us to look at ourselves, and nobody really wants to change that. We don't want to, this is just being human. We don't really want to change ourselves. The blame is always going to be on everybody else and everything else. But it's this change, and we don't want to change. We don't want to face our own prejudices, our own biases, our own racist perspectives. We don't want to look at that. We just think that's the way the world should be because of what we know. But we're missing something very essential about the gospel if we do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Tim, you were going to jump in, Dr. Timothy?
My experience in watching the film, it reminded me of when I first read Toni Morrison's Beloved.
Mm-hmm.
And she uses the term in there, re-memory, which is one way of defining it was remembering memory. So it's like a purposeful going back into memory and reliving it. And that's a very different thing in this situation for me as a white person as it is for an African American, because for me going into this, it's not the same sort of, there's real danger of trauma for an African American to relive this and to watch this film. It's a different sort of thing for me, but maybe this will help make the jump that I want to try to make real quick. When I began my classes this last week, a couple of years ago, I started noticing in academic conferences that people would begin their talk by saying, I want to start by acknowledging the indigenous lands upon which we stand. That the indigenous people took care of these lands. And I decided that that was a good practice to start my classes with. And I did that this last week for the first time. And I found it really helpful. And
Huh? How'd that go?
Yeah, it was, we'll see. We'll see.
Nobody
Nobody dropped the class.
The Dallas Seminary alum in me just went, oh.
and I clarified to them that my intention isn't like to start a campaign to return the lands to Native Americans, but my intention is to give honor to people from whom honor was taken. And that when we look at our past and we recognize and we give honor to the people who are there, who have been written out of the history, that the history doesn't exist, this story in 1917. My kids have done Texas history multiple years here and they've not heard of this. And we live in Texas. When we re-enter into our understanding, our imagination of the past, the people, and we give honor to them being, I am a man, we also begin to imagine the future differently. When we imagine what's next, when we plan, when we do city planning, when we imagine what our churches should look like, when we think about what's next, when it's all just white people, it starts to feel a little bit off. And so we start to ask questions and we start to imagine the future with those people, and giving honor to them and the contributions and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's, you, even when you touched on the part about the native lands, and when I think about this film, I think about, with the African-American soldiers not really receiving, due justice, right? Meaning, this was a rush trial. Like, it wasn't like you had several different witnesses coming forth, and Byron probably knows a little bit more, a little bit better. But I mean, this was one of those rush things, done deal, hung within 24 hours, right? Like something that would happen in the South, right? Like this is one of those.
You have to understand, you're in Houston, Texas. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, you're in Houston, Texas. You're in the South. And you have people that immediately want a response to the riot that took place. And so this was the largest murder trial in history at that time. It was the soldiers had a person that defended them. One person defended all of them with 2 weeks to prepare. And he wasn't a lawyer. Although he had taught law classes, he had never had any trial experience. And so this is what you had representing you to be able to go out. And so they needed to have an answer, a response. And like many trials that happened during that time period, it was a foregone conclusion before the trial started. And so I think the biggest travesty that we saw out of this whole event was that 13 soldiers lost their lives without even being proven guilty. As you mentioned in the film, Corporal Boston was one of those who never fired a shot, but yet he was hung ceremoniously before the gavel even hit, with the decision being made. And if there was any bright spot to come out of this, in January of 1918, there was a law that was passed within the military that said no conviction can stand unless it's first reviewed by the Judge Advocate General and approved by the President when it comes to hangings is concerned. And using that law actually commuted the sentences of 10 others that were condemned to death, and many others had their sentences reduced once it was given a second and third review. And so part of the work that I actually did is, and my fraternity got involved with this, is because the NAACP and the Houston branch specifically has taken up the charge with the family to go and get posthumous pardons for the 13 soldiers that were hung. And so we've partnered with them. We've actually passed resolutions at the local and at the national level in support of this effort to seek that, because they were denied due process. They did not get proper representation. And of course, not having the right to appeal the decision and summarily being hanged on the word of that trial and that tribunal. So, but to that point, when you look at the times, there was an effort to have immediate action to appease the population that they felt were most impacted, and also to send a message to any others going forward about what would take place if you were to have an uprising.
Yeah. And so even like, okay, and this moves us into kind of our last question, because we want to honor your time, and this is just going by way too fast. But like, what do we do now? What do we do with this information, right? Because to me, I think when I look at this and I look at the historical record, and when I look at the film especially, right, because I love how film and media just go straight to the heart, right? It engages all of our senses. It engages all of us from our mind, but also the visceral responses that are going on in our bodies. And when we're engaged in that, I immediately go, I need the government to do something, right? Like in my mind, I go, like, I understand the separation between federal and state, but the federal government did not do a good job of protecting its soldiers, right? And to the degree that we saw the complicit, like the federal government was complicit. Like, so we can say Jim Crow all day long, but in other areas, like when the United States needed the KKK to calm down, the United States federal government passed laws that then gutted the initial, the original KKK. Now it came back strong and furious with the birth of a nation in 1915, but that first KKK that came out right after slavery was abolished, the federal government got involved. And then they passed laws that when the KKK began to break those laws federally, they faced federal charges, right? And so that gutted the organization and put it in check. So it didn't matter what was going on the state level. When the federal government got involved, it said, no, we can bring you up on federal charges. Your state might overlook you, but we're gonna charge you federally, and then that's gonna be some different kind of consequences, right? So when I look at this, I go, the federal government needs to do something, right? Now, I'm not quite sure what all that is, but I look and I usually always go, who is the leader, right? Like to me, we can talk about, on the family level and what the men did and all of that. And that's a part of the discussion. But they were dealing with a system that they were, that they were supposed to be in obedience to, that was not, you know what I mean? Like they didn't have the authority. So who has the authority? And this goes back to how we view theology as well, right? If I'm a pastor and I'm a leader right now, and we're in the midst of this pandemic, right? And I have to make decisions, and mind you, people, I'm not going over into politics. I'm talking pure like leadership and my responsibility as a shepherd. My responsibility as a shepherd, if I love you and I value your life, is not to continue to put you in situations where your life might be in danger, right? So if I can get creative and find other ways for us to worship where your life is not in danger, then I can do that. And if somebody does, under my care, become sick because of my actions, then I have to take responsibility for that as the leader, right? So to me, it's the same thing. I need to calm down.
No, keep going, keep going.
I need to come. I was just like, I need to have a woosah moment, like woosah. I realized I'm really riled up. But I'm like, like, who's responsible here? What do we do? So let me kick it to you guys, because I go, what makes this right? I think the federal government needs to do something. Like, there needs to be some repentance. There needs to be some acknowledgement. There needs to be something where the families are, and I get it. Like, there's hurt and harm on all sides. But here's the key. If leadership does not get involved and begin to try to bring the people together, we still end up with a chasm between us. And this division just gets wider and wider instead of the bridge that we want. Okay. Where do we go from here? This is the last question. Where do we go from here?
Well, there's no singular answer. No single answer for that, right? Where we go is to look around us and to do what's next to us, and we're all in different situations and we're all in different places, and there are big things that we can all work on. We can all vote. We can all work against voter suppression. We can get involved with national causes, but as importantly, we need to, for part of what I try to get to my students to, is that you are to be transformed. It's not just about knowing what to do or thinking, because the situation is always going to be changing, and you're always going to have different arguments, and you're always going to be, but if you are transformed as a person, if the way that you imagine what needs to happen is transformed, then you are going to start seeing things. You're going to start being uncomfortable with different things, and you're going to start imagining new things that are better.
Yeah. Jump in here, Sister Nancy. I know you have to get ready to go. We want you to jump in.
Well, I would say something very similar. I mean, as from a faith perspective, it is, I can't myself individually change the government and changing how everybody sees things. I can do my part. I can vote. I can, take action where I can. Mm-hmm. But I think, like Dr. Timothy is saying, it's about us transforming ourselves, being transformed, so that I don't know. I always look to St. Paul, in his letters when he's saying, it's the call is to live in Christ. And what does that mean? That means that we see things then through the eyes of Christ, and that we're changed, through Christ. And when we do that, when we truly say we can live in Christ, then we are participating in that reconciliation of the world to God.
Yes.
And not only to God, but to each other. It's both and. So we're participating in that. So when we are truly taking in the message of the gospel, when we're saying we are living that life of Christ, it's not making excuses for our behaviors. It's challenging us to change. And nobody likes to change. We don't like to change, but it's challenging us to change.
Yeah. Tell us how to keep in touch with you.
Well, you can find me on all social media, anywhere, Nancy Usselmann, or go on #MediaNuns. You can find a lot about us. But on our website, bemediamindful.org, you can find a lot about the work that I do and also the area of ministry that I work in. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Timothy as well, Dr. Timothy, how can people keep in touch with you?
My last name's very unusual, so if you can remember how to spell my last name, you can find me anywhere. So it's very easy to find me. I just wanted to say that transformation of heart and of imagination is why films like this are just so important.
Absolutely. Thank you. You get the last word. Byron, Gautier.
Well, the one thing I
What
don't
do you
want us to
say?
miss out on is the beauty that is in this film. You do get a chance at
Yes.
a look at what life was like during that time period. You got
Mhm.
a chance to see, I mean, this is 1917, right before the Harlem Renaissance. So you hear about a little bit about the music and the dancing
Yeah.
and that there was life there and people were being delivered post-slavery. But it's also a fight that said once you've been delivered, not to go back to where you've been delivered from. And so I think it's a really powerful message for us, and I definitely encourage people to see it. If you're interested in supporting the posthumous pardons, you can reach out to veterans at naacphouston.org. It's a website. If you reach out there or call the Houston office at NAACP, someone will get back to you. But I'm available. I can be found like Dr. Timothy. My name is a little different, and so it's very easy to find me as well on all the different media platforms. So
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much, our guest, again, for joining us on today. My apologies that we had so many technical difficulties, but again, I feel a little bit better that it wasn't just me, that Zoom was down worldwide. So I can't really do anything about that, but we will make sure that this gets to the people and that they're able to hear it. By all means, everyone, you can continue to keep up with the 4050 Project at 4050project.org, and that's 4050project.org, and then on social media at 4050 Project. All right, we love you guys. We thank you, and we will see you. Listen, we're going to try to figure this out because we still have some more lives coming up, so we're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to figure this out. Okay.